Okay, welcome to the second video in lines and curves. This one will go into greater detail about more features that you can use to modify your lines and curves. Since you selected this second video using the step-by-step tutorials under help, your menus will be expanded to more options. If you haven't used this feature in EmbroideryWare, I suggest you use it so that your menus get set up correctly. If you are just following along on YouTube, you don't have to do that. You'll have a lot more buttons here, which might be more confusing. So if it's confusing to you, I would suggest you use the help feature under here and select your video. Okay, let's get started. So lines and curves, like I said before, are very important to drawing anything in EmbroideryWare. And so I've added some new features. Well, I've exposed some more buttons so we can explore more about what we can do with lines and curves. So let's say that we were going to draw a heart, okay, like this. I got it upside down, and we wanted to mirror that heart in this direction. Now instead of just there's a distinction here. We got points here, which we talked about in the last video, which you modify using the edit points menu, where you have various different options to do that. And then we had also the ability to add lines and curves before, which essentially are point operations, where we add more points, which basically the endpoints define the curve segments. Now we have a new menu that has shown up that now has a bunch of things that we can do with the curves themselves. So the distinction between this menu and this menu is this menu primarily you're doing things with the endpoints. You're either adding more endpoints in, or in this case you're adding more endpoints which essentially define lines in the end within the graphic. This graphic here you're actually working with the graphics themselves, the curves they're called here, and you can do things with them. So for example, let's say we wanted to mirror this heart over to the right. We could choose the graphic by selecting it, and then we could choose one of the mirror operations. So here we have a mirror curve in X about a point. When you do that, when you select that option, you can mirror this curve about a point. So if I click this point, a new curve will be created exactly on that point. Now that's not very useful here because I didn't really do that very well, but let's choose a different example that might be more illustrative of what's going on here. So let's say that I chose to have a paisley left like this, okay? And let's say I wanted to mirror that about this point. I could select the graphic and then choose mirror about point and then select that point. And now we have a nice looking thing here that's perfectly symmetrical about this point. Now if we want to do that dynamically, we could choose the same graphic and choose what down here is called dynamically. And what that means is the actual mirrored line is shown here by this line going vertically. And as we move it back and forth, you can kind of see what you want. So you can do some things that are interesting, like this, where it's simply mirrored and it's crossing over itself. We kind of put the point negative to the point. Now, this could get even more interesting if we do this. We select again, and we select mirror curve and Y dynamically. We can then create something like that. So now we have that as our four objects. We can do more things than that. We could also we have a mirror function where we mirror about 4 quadrants. So we could have this kind of thing. We could end up having the same thing we had before by just doing that. All right, so what we're doing here is we're actually creating new graphics. These are actually going to be stitching out separately. The other functions that we have in here is we can align things. So let's say we have this Paisley object and we wanted to align it to, let's say, the end of this spiral. So we're going to take a spiral, we're going to put the spiral here. And let's say we wanted to align this spiral to the end of this Paisley object. We do that, we select both objects, and we basically, just like curves where we had align point X and Y, at this point we can say align curves X and Y. Now if we click one and then next, the curves actually, that one of the curves, they both moved. Actually, we moved this point to this point. So exactly, if I wanted to line this point to this point, watch, they both move, okay? If you want to align this point to this spiral, we have to lock one of them, because what's happening is it's moving all of them and it's taking this point and pointing it to that point. Now, it's not like the point align point thing where it's actually moving the points. We're actually moving the whole curves based on those points. So if we don't want the spiral to move, let's say, that's ultimately our goal, we're going to hit fix. So now the spiral is fixed, but we still can go ahead and align the curves to that point. Does that make any sense? So whatever's selected is going to be acted on. So when we actually have these functions, it's going to act on both graphics. And we actually have to, unfortunately, have the spiral selected in order for us to select the point where we want it to go to. So by fixing the spiral, that won't move, but we still can use its points. Which brings up an interesting question here is, if we are going to use these to align things, sometimes maybe it makes more sense to let's say, align things with some kind of construction graphic. And the way that you make this a construction graphic is you select the graphic, and then down in here, in the drop down, there is a selection for construction. Now, when you set a construction, by its nature, it ends up, I believe, being fixed. So if I wanted to align these graphs to, let's say, this point here, I could move that. Oh no, the construction, I'm sorry, the construction has to be locked too. So basically, you have to fix the construction. The thing about this construction that makes it unique is it doesn't get stitched out. So it can stay there as guides for you, but you have to basically fix them, otherwise it won't work. All right, I didn't remember that correctly. Sorry about that. So this won't actually be stitched out. So if I go and I look to see what we're going to stitch out, I can go to File and Print, and we'll see what actually gets stitched out. And you can see that all that gets stitched out is the Paisley and the spiral. The construction curve didn't get printed out. So that's all that the construction curve is for. So in most cases, you would fix the construction curve if you want to use some kind of guide curves to actually do your designs. So let's see, what else do we have here? So we already went through all the mirroring. And so basically these align curves X, Y, they just operate similarly to the points. In that you select one point and then another point, and those alignments will occur. Just remember that the thing that you want to not move, you have to click Fixed to fix it. All right, so we have this strange looking object. Let's see, what else do we have here? So we also can rotate things. So if we selected this all, and we went down here and said select rotate 90 degrees, at this point the instructions say just tell us a point to rotate around. So we would just rotate around, let's say this point. Let's say we just wanted to rotate around the center of the spiral. Oops, I'm not doing a good job of selecting the center of the spiral. You know, we could do it around the paisley points. So once you understand you can rotate around these points, see you can rotate even around a control point. You can line things up in very precise ways. You can move everything yourself instead. You don't have to use these alignments, but this is just showing you some of the things we can do. Down here we have a rotate point using 2 points, and at this point you could choose, it says choose a point to rotate around. So if I choose the center, then I can choose, let's say, any point I want as a handle, and I can kind of slowly tweak it to where I want it, let's say, and then you rotate that way. We can change the size of these by scaling. And if you look at here, if we want to scale precisely, we can enter values in for both the X scale and Y scale down here. So if we just wanted to tweak this a little bit bigger, we would just do 1.1, which would basically make it it will multiply it by 1.1 each time, and that would basically make it 10% bigger or so. And at this point you can choose scale amount by around the center, which would be the center of the object, like here. Of course, the center of the object is probably somewhere in this area. Or you could have it scale about the origin, which I don't know where the origin went. So we got this so far off here. Let's move this. You know how to move things before because I showed you in the first video. Okay, so we can scale it about the origin. So like, for example, let's say we had this and we wanted to just keep it sort of in this quadrant of the hoop, let's say. I'm going to move it over there kind of to get in the quadrant to start with. And then let's say we just wanted to scale out where it would scale about the 0. We would choose the scale about origin. And so when we click it now, it scales out from the origin and keeps on growing in that direction. There's other ways to scale things, which probably is more convenient. This is going to scale precisely, so if you wanted to do something that's kind of fun with just concentric circles, let's say. So let's say we go ahead and we make a circle, and you just want to do a bunch of concentric circles. What you can do is you can select this, you can duplicate it, and then you can basically go ahead and say, let's say we're going to make them smaller, so we'll do 0.9 and 0.9. At this point, we can scale them about the center, and then basically this circle will be smaller, and then we'll duplicate again, and then we can just make it smaller again. Oops. I want to make sure you turn off the one you don't want. Did I end up, I think I ended up getting 2 copies of the same thing. I got a little ambitious there. Okay, so actually, okay, that's duplicate. Now we're going to go ahead and scale about origin, about center. Center is the center of the object. And then we can duplicate again, and we can do scale about center. And you can see what I mean. It just keeps on getting smaller and smaller, and it's concentric. One of the other things that you can do, let's see what some other stuff we can have fun with. Now, if we did this and we actually changed these values to something other than 0.9, let's say we did 0.7. Now, this is going to scale in the X 0.9, but in the Y 0.7. So again, if we copy this and then choose scale about center, when we do this, we're going to get an oval. All right. of that ratio. So it kind of looks almost like a CVS logo. Oh, actually, there should be a circle in the middle, shouldn't there? But anyway, so if we copied this again and we did this again, you would see that it would just keep on getting smaller and smaller, and the ratio would do what it's doing. So we covered the scale. There's other functions here where you can't see on the screen because it's going off, but we have various things where we can offset the curves, things like that. We can join curves. We can do various other things. So let's go look at joining curves and doing things like that with curves. So for example, let's say I wanted to draw a pie shape with a wedge out of it. I'm just going to turn the grid off. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some lines like a pie shape. Now I want to make this a pie shape, but I basically had to draw two graphics. So what I want to do is I want to cut apart these graphics, and I'm just going to cut the circle for simplicity and then move the lines to the ends. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate the circle. I'm going to zoom in quite a bit so that I can actually go ahead and put a point here. So to put a point there, we saw that in the point menu before where we could add points. So I'm going to add a point along the curve here, right here. So now I have an extra point, and I'm going to, oh, by the way, you hit the right mouse button and hold it down, you can drag the view over. Okay, and put a point here. All right, so that point wasn't so good. So let's just put another point. Oh, I guess it deleted both points. Okay, so let's start over. Oh, because I undid. Right. So let's do that again. So we're going to add a point by choosing a point along the curve. And we're going to click the point here. And we're going to click the point here. All right. So now I have two new points. Now what I want to do is I want to cut these apart. So I'm going to split curves and click that point, and it's going to split the curve, and it's going to make a new curve between these 2 points. And I'm going to do that again for this point. All right, now I basically have 3 curves, and you're probably wondering, why do I have 3 curves? Well, the original end point, start point of the curve here was here. We cut it here, and we cut it here. So then we ended up having it, this is being one curve, this is the next curve, this is the third curve. So we want to go ahead and delete one of these curves, and it will be this one. So we're going to use the select, and we're going to simply delete that curve. Now for the pie wedge, we could cut them too, but it's probably much easier just to move the points to the endpoints. Now you're probably thinking, well, I could do that visually, or I could do it like the points you've learned before, where we actually can just line up the endpoints. So we would do that how? We would select align point at X and Y, and the instructions say click on a point to align at X and Y. I want to align this point to that point, and I want to align this point to that point. Now we have a pie, but we have 3 graphics here. So what do we do? How do we join all those? Well, you can click the join button, and you can click the graphics, and it will figure out what it can join. And now it's joined. So I did that twice. These buttons over here are act once points. If you notice, when you hold down or you hover over them, I'll say it's join curves once, split curves once. There's also join and split on here, and those aren't once. They just set a mode, so you could join and split for as long as you want it. All right. Um, so let's try some more functions. So we've joined this curve, made a pie wedge. Let's make an interior to the pie. So we can do that by actually choosing an offset. This will offset our current graphic, and we can preview which way it's going to offset. That's a little tiny offset. So let's make this bigger and preview it. So now we'll have much bigger preview. You'll notice it does some funny stuff sometimes like this because it's actually moving these curves over and they cross sometimes. So you'll have to basically fix that. And we can fix that similarly to the way we've done it before. Some of this stuff is kind of annoying, but it's just the way it is. Okay. So again, you would just go ahead and add an endpoint. Now, instead of adding an endpoint, we also have this function where we can split curves at a new point that you can use. Now, unfortunately, this is probably going to get confused. So I'm just going to split this curve here first so that I can go ahead and move that. I'm going to move this out. I'm going to go ahead and delete this line and this line I'm going to leave as is. And I'm going to go ahead and extend this line to cross. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose this and split the curve here. And then I'm going to delete that little segment that's there. I'm going to move this guy to the point to a line there. And then I'm going to join these two curves like that. So that curve's now joined. I know that was a lot of work, but that's just how you have to do it with this program right now. So I'm going to split this curve, split this curve. I'm going to delete these two little segments that I don't want. And I'll just move these guys over. If you're close enough, when you move these points, and I'm just going to get them close, when you do the actual join operation, it will end up joining them just fine. Of course, there's no need to join this right now because this is the actual endpoint. But if they were far apart, you could just join them. I'm going to do this align point again. So I hope you understand the distinction between aligning points and align curves. The points are actually the things that define the endpoints and graphics, whereas the curve is the whole curve. All right. So I've showed you how to join and split curves. This all follows on when you get to more complicated embroidery objects. The splitting of curves will become more sensible to you when you do certain operations later on. But this pretty much covers most of the manipulations that you'll have with lines and curves. You might want to add more lines and curves to objects at times, and you might want to do it in an even spaced way. So there's different options. I would encourage you to play around with the other options. For example, if we wanted to put 4 new endpoints between here and here, let's say, or in the pie wedge, we could do that simply by choosing this function. And then we choose the 2 endpoints that we want to add additional curves to. And see how it automatically adds curves to these endpoints. These will become more obvious later when we do more complicated embroidery objects. Right now, with these simple running stitches, there's not really a need to do this, but you'll see the reason for doing this later.